Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Above the Bar podcast, where each week we belly up to the bar with a new guest, find out what they do, who they are, and what makes them great. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Alrighty, folks, welcome back to the Above the Bar podcast. It's your host, Sean. It is the second Wednesday in January because we did one on the 1st of January. So how about that? We're just rolling right along. 2 shows already into the year. And tonight we have bellied up to the bar. As you know, if the equipment breaks and things aren't working right, we know why, because every time we have a guest, see that? It's already started. Every time we have a guest and we talk about ghosts and we talk about paranormal or anything paranormal related, this always happens. And I forgot to even ask our guest where he's at. See, that's it, because he's in parts unknown. He's secretly hiding so that the spirits can't find him. So you're going to have to use your Ouija board. That's Ouija for those of you that actually know how to pronounce it. Use your Ouija board, all those kind of things. And then you can find our guest. So I'm just going to say, and then he can tell us if he feels like it. Joining us from parts unknown, it's paranormal author John Olsen.
Thanks so much, Sean, for having me on.
Absolutely. I told you I had no idea. I tell everybody, I have no idea how I'm going to introduce folks. But where are you at, John? Do you want to tell us what state you're in?
Yeah, I'm in northern Utah. So right, not too far from the Idaho border. So right there in northern Utah. It's an area called Cache Valley. Oddly enough, it's actually called, so part of northern Utah and part of Wyoming and part of Idaho is called Bridgerland. That's how I got the name Stranger Bridgerland. For my first book in the series is called Stranger Bridgerland because it was originally explored by Jim Bridger, who was a famous
explorer,
trapper.
Okay. Yep. Well, I will tell you before we even get into the show and we take care of all the housekeeping, I say this all the time. By far, in my opinion, and I've been to like 40 some of the 50 states, Utah to me is the prettiest state in the country. I don't care about your beaches and your lakes and all that until you've spent some time in Utah, and you can go from being in the Grand Escondinan staircase and then end up in a in the snowy mountains and then back into a valley all within a couple of hours of each other in April. Until you've done that, it is a different world out there in Utah, and I highly recommend if you've never been, folks. And you can do Park City, but save that shit for somebody else. But all right, well, let's get into some house cleaning. We're going to be talking to John about his book series, Stranger Bridgerland book series. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how do you write paranormal stories, because he's been investigating these things for 30 years, interviewing people for 30 years. How do you decipher real from BS and figure it all out? But before we get into that, let's talk about something real, which is the big board over my right shoulder for Sticker and a Cause. Maybe you've written a book, you have a podcast, a band, I don't care what it is. If you've created a sticker for it, reach out to me on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, X. Our website is theabovethebarpodcast.com. Our email is abovethebarpodcast@gmail.com. Reach out to us. Let us know what you got going on. We'll tell you where to send the sticker to, and we'll read about you live on the air. It won't cost you a dime. Get you a little bit of free publicity. Get some folks to know what you got going on. We also got to talk about our folks that pay the bills around here. That is Budget Blinds of East Greenbush, Hudson and Coxsackie, and Schoharie. 3 different budget blinds. They are North America's largest custom window treatment company. They handle everything from shutters, shades, blinds. They can do security shutters. They can do tint on your window. You name it. They have access to all of it. They can handle all those different things for you. They comes with a free consultation, and most of their products have a 5-year, no questions asked warranty. They even have one that has a lifetime, no questions asked. That is old school Sears Craftsman style, where you just pick up the phone and go, it doesn't work anymore. And they take care of you and they get you all taken care of. So make sure you're reaching out to Budget Blinds of East Greenbush, Budget Blinds of Schoharie, Budget Blinds of Hudson and Cooksaki. This month, their sale is 20% off your order. They're taking an additional 5% off of anything that is motorized. And as always, if you tell them that you're there to belly up to the bar, they're going to give you another 5% off. So make sure you're taking care of yourself, as always, with Budget Blinds. Oh, Rose, where'd you go, Rose? You were there, and now you're gone. Your buddy Rose, John. She's that's who introduced us. She's all about it right now.
Yeah.
Let's get into it here. So tell me a little bit about this, John. So you've been investigating paranormal stuff and interviewing and documenting firsthand accounts for 30 years. You only look like you're 25, so I don't understand how that. But for 30 years, you've been doing this. How did you even get into it?
Well, first of all, thank you. I've never been called younger than what I am, so that's nice. But it's interesting because I actually grew up in a home that was built in 1883, and it was very paranormally active. I had a lot of experiences with ghosts growing up, and as I got older, when I was little, my parents they didn't want us to talk about it because they're afraid people are going to think we're loony or crazy, or if we're saying our house is haunted. But by the time I got older, I wanted to, I learned everything I could, and I had friends that had experiences in my house, and I had to admit, yeah, I grew up in a haunted house. And so I started telling my stories, and then before long I was getting other people's stories, and I was going out and hunting down people, so to get their stories. So
now, so staying with this for a second, and it's something you just said to me, you're like, yeah, our house was built in 1880s. In the grand scheme, that's not like, I don't know if you've ever been over to Europe. They're like, yeah, we live in kind of an older house. It was built in the 1700s, 1600s. Why do you think here in the US, when somebody talks about like, yeah, man, my house is haunted, it's pretty old, it was built in the 1800s. Like, what do you think that differentiation is? Why here that's like, that's a brand new house. You just built that thing, huh? It's only 100 years old. What do you think the big differentiation is there with the haunted piece?
Well, one of the biggest reasons, in the valley that I grew up in, it was only established in I want to say 1850 was one of the first
Oh, wow.
places that was established here, um, and so that's part of it, is the fact that 1883, it's one of the oldest buildings in that town. It was one of the first homes built there, so I think that makes a big difference too, as well. And I think that it really depends on the people that were in the house, and you know how they were. This is the biggest thing when I talk to people about ghosts in general, is if somebody was a prankster in life, they're going to be a prankster in the afterlife. If they
Oh,
were a jerk in life, they're going to be a jerk in the afterlife. So it's kind of one of those things when you meet 10 people on the street and 9 out of 10 are pretty good people. It's that one a-hole, it's the number 10 that you got to look out for. It's the same with ghosts. So
that's a fair assessment. I get that. So you grow up in this situation, the 1880s farmhouse. Uh, so how did people start taking when you were like, how do you even approach somebody and be like, so heard you saw Sasquatch, especially when it's like, oh, Joey sits at the end of the bar here in town. He said he saw Sasquatch the other day. Like,
right.
how do you even approach that?
Well, I'll tell you, and in the beginning, when I first started this, there was no internet, there was no anything like that. So a lot of times, if somebody didn't come to me because they heard about my story and then they would come to me, that happened sometimes. Or you would hear those stories out there where it was like, oh, my cousin's best friend, had an encounter. And so I would have to go down the line to find the person that it actually happened to, and then convince them to tell me the story, or somehow get it from them. And it's interesting that way, because back in the day it was so much harder, but now since my books are out and I have a website, people come to me and say, hey, I've got an experience, and I'll set up a time and interview them on Skype if they're really far away, or something like that. And
You still use Skype?
Well, not
It's funny
that's
right in
just
and of itself.
right.
That's a ghost in and of itself.
It is a ghost on. That's
Listen,
right.
my first few podcasts before we went live like this,
Mhm.
I'd tell people, I'd be like, "Hey, you got a Skype account?" And they'd be like, "God, I think I do," because we weren't doing that was before Zoom, and people would be
Right.
like, I think I got a Skype. Give me a minute, man.
Yeah.
I'll look it up."
Yeah.
And we would do them over Skype. That's too funny.
Yeah.
Now, so in this process, so people are coming to you, and I like the idea that you started doing this before, we were just jumping online. We're probably talking what I'm thinking here for a second. I joined the Marine Corps in '94, so you were talking early '90s, early mid '90s when you started this.
Yeah.
How do you think that level of investigation where you really had to go out and figure it out? And look, folks, let me pause for a second. If you're just joining us, you want to see what John's got going on, strangerbridgeland.com. We're talking about paranormal investigations. How do you investigate this? If you've got a paranormal story or a question that how do I figure out if this is really what's going on? Drop them in the comments. John will answer them for you. But how do you think it's helped you from an investigative standpoint that when you used to have to kind of run these things down, literally physically go do it without being like, well, let me go online and figure out where this house was built and who owned it. Like how did that help you in your process?
It really helped me to get, an understanding of people, to be honest, because I think, nowadays, kids, even my kids, they would rather text than call, which, I can
Oh,
completely
absolutely.
understand. But there's this ability to sit down and have a conversation with somebody that we're kind of losing. I think some
Absolutely.
generations, this generation in particular, are losing that. And so that's one leg up that I had, I think, from running down the story and finding the people, because when you approach somebody, or back in the day, actually call their number on their phone and they pick up, and you have to somehow go from hello to I heard you had a paranormal experience and tell me all about it. So without them hanging up. So yeah, I think that was one of the things that definitely helped me later on, because now I'm able to talk to just about anybody. And it's I think that's what really helped.
Hold on, Rose. How can you have never had a paranormal encounter? That doesn't even make sense to me. That means that every single situation you've ever had in your life, you were able to easily, scientifically explain, run it down, and explain it to somebody where you were like, "Oh, no, no. That was just I have a hot water heat in my home, and that's what that knocking sound is
Right.
in July."
Right.
Like you were able that makes no sense to me, Rose. I can't even I'd be curious if the boys would say the same thing, about that. It's yeah, she says it, yeah, never happened. That's wild to me. I that doesn't even dawn in my head that you could never have a paranormal experience. So so now kind of staying with this theme of how you were able to run these things down, if someone was coming to you and they were saying, "Hey, I'm interested in this genre of writing. I'm thinking about writing about paranormal. I had an experience. I have a really old house. It was built in the '90s." Um, you know, that's what these kids
Yeah.
say, like, "Man, that shit's old.
Yeah.
It's from the '90s." Like,
Yeah.
yes. Um, but somebody came to you and was like, "Hey, I'm thinking about this style of writing or getting into this genre, whether it's to write fiction or nonfiction. What are some of the things that you've learned over your time from the investigative side of it that you would suggest to them? A couple of ideas to make it better for them."
Well, at first, I would start out by just reading some good paranormal stories and finding out, um, how you like to write. One of the things that I wanted to do when I started writing the books, I gathered them forever, but it was only about 10 years ago that I started writing them. And so growing up, I had undiagnosed ADHD. And it wasn't until my son was younger and we took him to the doctor and the doctor was asking him questions. And I was like, oh, yeah, yeah, in my own head about me. And, but what that helped me with is the writing style that I like to do is I like to have short stories. So each one of my book has about 28, 29 short stories that are all paranormal. And because of my ADHD, I love to be able to sit down and read a story that doesn't have too much fluff. It gets right to kind of the point.
Meat and potatoes.
Yeah, the meat and the potatoes. Because that's something that I can connect to and I can go. So that's what I would suggest to somebody is find out what kind of writing style that you really like and what you like to read, and practice towards that. As you interview people, write those stories, have somebody read them and tell you, give you pointers on, well, I like this, I didn't like that. You need to, it's just repetitive work. And then, every one of my books, I feel like gets a little bit better because of my writing style gets better. So
how about your vetting process so that you're not like, again, as I joked around, like, Herb, he sits down at the end of the bar. He's always drunk, but he saw Sasquatch. Like, how do you vet that out? Because, some people just passionately believe that, like, no, I saw it. It was there.
yeah.
I'll give you an example. I just was watching a video recently, and it was a hunting story where the guy was like in his hunting blind, and they said it was like 4:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden they heard bang, 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 bang. Like the guy was just let loose his rifle, and they were like, "There's no way he shot anything this early." And they go over to see what's going on, and the guy's like running towards him. He's like, "What's going on?" He's like, "I just shot Sasquatch. I was sitting in my blind, and he reached in and he grabbed my cell phone out of my hand." And they're like, "What?" So they're like, "Well, let's go look." And he's like, "You guys can go look. I'm leaving." And the guy went back to his truck or whatever. Well, sure enough, they went and investigated. And I don't remember where they were at. And this was I think they were in Texas, because this seems like a very Texas thing. They got there and they said gorilla. It could have been whatever. A primate of some sort they found a dead primate body because it had reached in and saw the guy's cell phone in the blind and took it out of his hand and ran off with it. And this dude inside of his blind just started shooting blindly through it. So how do you vet that kind of a story from, yeah, this really happened? Like, what's your process?
Well, when I'm able to interview somebody, so first of all, the number one thing is it has to come from the person that it happened to. I have to interview that person. It can't be, because there's a ton of those stories out there where it's like, oh, that happened to my cousin's friend, and this is what happened. I have to actually be able to look at the people and talk to them. That's the main thing. And then after that, I just kind of have to go off of instinct when I'm listening to them. It's amazing to me how many people will be telling their story to me, and they're in their mind, they're transformed right back there, and they get emotional. And so this might sound weird, but the vast majority of the people that I interview, I feel like they're being very honest. Could it have been something else, and then that's what they thought? I mean, that's entirely possible. But as for them trying to pull the wool over my eyes, or just trying to find, get clout or whatever like that, it's so very rare that happens.
And look, folks, if you're just joining us and you're interested in what we're talking about, we're talking with John Olsen. He's written the Stranger Bridgerland stories, strangerbridgerland.com. And Bridger is with an ER at the end of it, just so I'm saying it right and it makes sense to everybody. If you got questions, let us know. If you're out there listening to us, please take a moment, share this with your own network so other people can know what John's got going on. So how about stories that you've heard, John? Like I said, we've got stories in these books of ghosts, monsters, haunting, glitches in the Matrix. I'm always curious of when people talk about that. That's a very newer thing since the Matrix movies. Sasquatches and UFOs. Before I ask you about what is your one story that you were like, this is holy crap story, and you're like, and your other one where you're like, yeah, really, this is crap story. What kind of glitches in the Matrix? I'm very interested in that, because I feel like that, again, that's a newer term we hear. Like nobody back in, like, the the times of Jesus were like, Lord, there's a glitch in the matrix. I saw a cat disappear into a wall. Like,
Right.
this is such a newer phenomenon to hear. What
Mhm.
what kind of stories are we getting about that?
So they can vary quite a bit. I have a story from a woman that I interviewed who she travels for work, and she happened to be back east, and it was in the fall, and she got done with her training early, and there was near her where she was staying, there was this trail that went around this huge pond. It was a big pond, almost a small lake, and she was walking it like she did in the afternoons, and she was coming around, and two people on bikes, kind of came around the corner and came past her, and they kind of waved and nodded at each other, and um then as they disappeared behind her, they reappeared coming around the same corner again, and she stopped and they stopped, and they're kind of looking at each other, and they were like, how did you do that? And she's like, no, how did you guys do that? They both had experienced the same thing. It was almost like a skip on a record.
Oh
It
shit!
played
Like you went through
again.
a wormhole and didn't know it.
Yes. Yeah. One of them went back, or they both went back. It's something like that where it seems like a glitch in the matrix. But what I liked about that story was, even though I only interviewed her, the other two people had experienced the same thing, and it was just really strange like that. So um that's very similar to some of the glitches in the matrix stories that I've collected. The other one that happens every once in a while, for example, there was a kid. He grew up in Missouri, and he was telling me that across next to his house was a field, and then a really old farmhouse. And when he was about 15, this old couple bought the old house, and when him and his dad talked to him, they couldn't decide whether they were going to tear it down and build a new house, or whether they were going to restore the old house. And they chose to restore the old house, and they did. And he remembered, all through high school, he mowed their lawn, and they'd had an article written in the paper about how beautiful the house was when they were done. Well, jump forward to, I think it was 15, 20 years, and he had moved out of town. He went into the military, and his parents had moved. But after he'd been out of the military, him and his kids and his wife were going through near that town. He goes, oh, let's go see, my old hometown. You guys never seen it before. And when they were looking at his old house, he noticed that there was a brand new house where the old house had been. And he thought, oh, that's too bad. I wonder what happened. And so he just went and knocked on the door, and this younger lady answered, and he goes, I used to live over there, and I remember mowing the lawn for your parents. What happened to the old house? And she goes, oh, well, they when they bought it, they decided to tear it down and build a new house. And he goes, no, he says they remodeled it. They
Yeah.
remodeled, completely restored it. And she's like, no, they tore it down, and they had passed away, and she'd taken the house. And he even went to the library, because he's like, it was in the paper, and it's changed now. Everybody else remembers it, that they tore down the house and built a new house rather than restoring the old house. So
Oh,
yeah.
that's it's like, how does that like that's like the Mandela effect.
Yeah, I like to refer to them as like personal Mandela effects, where instead of, a bunch of people, it may only affect one or two people.
Now I'm curious, what
So
was his dad still alive?
no, his dad was gone. I believe he had one brother still alive, and when he talked to him, his brother was like, no, they tore it down and built a new one. So he's actually the only one that remembers it. But
Oh,
he's like, I mowed that lawn for this old couple every week for like 3 years while I was going to high school. I know what it looked like, and it was beautiful, and it doesn't exist
and
anymore.
no
So
picture, no pictures of the finished product.
nope. Nope.
Wow.
Like he was saying, I remember when they finished, the local paper did a big thing on it, because it was an older farmhouse that had been restored, and it was beautiful, and and now that's gone, and yeah, it's not the same at all. So
That's wild. See, that's those things where to me it's like whether he's remembering it wrong or whatever it is, like how does one's mind just like, no, this is what was going on there. I remember what was going on there. I cut the grass for 3 years. I know what that house was.
right.
That's wild right there.
No.
So, and look, folks, if you're just joining us again, John Olsen, he's a paranormal author. He's written the Stranger Bridgerland series, strangerbridgerland.com. You can see what he's got going on. So, my next question for you, there, John, is, and before we get into your best and worst stories here, is that the only writing you're doing is just paranormal stories, or is there anything else in your repertoire?
No, it's really just paranormal that I focus on
Okay.
doing. So it's kind of worked out really well for me. And I may down the road write something more of a
Children.
novelization or something. Yeah, that's completely possible.
I write kids stories about my version of Casper, but you won't like him. He's a
Right.
very different Casper. Uh, so now in your experiences going out and doing these things, what is probably for you the one that like you really dug into this story? You were like, oh my gosh, this is the one. They've got crop circles, the UFO, they've got the alien hand, the whole nine yards. And when it was all done, you were like, wait a sec, hold on. Like, is there one of those for you?
So I have one that doesn't it really so it's a story that is so far out there that when I originally got it, I was like, yeah, this is too out there. But then I started doing research and it started to make a lot more sense based on other people. And I'll tell you the story
Yeah, please.
and you'll see what I'm talking about. You'll see what I'm talking about. So I was working at this place, and this younger guy worked there, and he'd heard about me telling some stories, and it took me a long time because I knew he had a story, but he didn't want to tell it. And finally I got him to tell this story. And
Please tell me he was anal probed. Please tell me he was anal probed.
no, but it was scary. So when he was in his early 20s, he came to visit a friend here in Cache Valley, northern Utah, and immediately fell in love with it because he's a very outdoors guy, and you've got skiing and rock climbing and fishing and everything within 10 minutes. And so he was single at the time and young, so he just quit his job and moved here.
Oh, wow.
And he loved to hike, and him and one of his friends had planned to go on this hike to an area. It's called it'll come to me in a second. Mount Naomi is what it's called. Now it's usually just like a half a day hike or a day hike, but they were going to take their sleeping bags and just sleep under the stars and just enjoy the whole thing. Well, in the last hour, his buddy couldn't go, and so being in his 20s, he's like, yeah, I'm invincible, I'll just go on my own. And so he got a late start, got up there, and this area is right near the tree line, so it's really high. It's where the trees start getting sparse. And
Okay.
he found a place. It started getting late, so he found a place to put his bedroll out. At the time, it was August. There was a fire ban, so he couldn't have any fire, but he'd taken some food to just eat. He ate and he looked at the stars, and then he always had he would always bring one of his old ratty books to read before he went to sleep. He does all that, falls asleep. Well, he wakes up around 2 o'clock in the morning, and he's a really heavy sleeper, so he doesn't know how he woke. Like something woke him up, right? Something, and he, is kind of sitting in his sleeping bag, and it's really quiet. And he starts hearing a whistle from behind him and to his right, and he's looking for his headlamp He knew he had it when he went to bed. He's looking for his headlamp and can't find it. He's slipping on his shoes because it's just getting really creepy with this weird whistle. It doesn't sound like a bird. Birds don't sing at night anyway. And then all of a sudden he gets hit in the chest with just a rock about the size of a quarter. Not hard, but just like getting his attention. And about that time, he realizes that he's still wearing his headlamp. So he flips it on and turns towards where the whistle's coming from. And there's a little pile of rocks. And sitting on the rocks is this creature. And he explained it as it had old ratty homemade clothes. It had greenish tint skin, pointy ears. Like when he was telling me this, it reminded me of the guys in Harry Potter that run the bank, with the pointy ears and the pointy nose.
The trolls.
Yeah, something like that. So
Dobby.
Yeah. And so he's kind of in shock because the thing puts his hand up to block the light from its eyes. And he sits there for, he doesn't know how long, just in complete shock because this is the weirdest thing that's ever happened to him. And all of a sudden he notices that it's trying to hide something behind its back. And he looks and realizes that this thing has his book in its hand. He has the book, the guy that he was reading when he went to bed, in its hand. And he realizes this thing has been close enough to steal that from him. And he kind of breaks him out of the trance. He grabs all his stuff, heads for the trail, trips, falls down, and the whistling starts again behind him. He gets as much as he can get in his arms and runs down to his truck and leaves. And, I heard this story, and up to this point, that was like one of the most amazing stories I'd heard. But like you said, it was one of those where you're like, and he was just adamant that it was true. And I asked him if he'd ever had anything else paranormal happen. He says, no, I've never had anything else. He goes, I wasn't drinking. I wasn't on drugs. I promise. And he was very secretive. He's to the, as far as I knew him,
right.
He was like, do not, you can change my name if you put it in a book, all of these things. And so I kind of marked that off as a one-off, but that it would be amazing to put in one of my books. So I did. I put it in one of my books. And I had 3 different people contact me after that. One lady emailed me and she said, I was reading your book and I read that and I dropped the book. She said, because my husband, when we got married, had been elk hunting in that very same area and told me he saw that creature. No. He had seen that. And he said, and she's like, I laughed at him. I said he was crazy or drunk. And I'd never heard of that before. And then I read your book about that very same area. And I've had 3 different people tell me that they have seen that very same creature. So doing some research.
You got the Bridgerland troll.
Yeah. Doing some research. There are those, they're called, back east, they call them, the natives called them pugwajis. It was in their folklore, these little creatures that, were nasty little things that would steal things and try and, shoot people with little arrows, and it's all in their folklore. So, it kind of lined up after I interviewed him that, he saw what he said he saw, which is kind of crazy.
Shit.
Yeah.
He saw a pudgy budgie.
Yeah, he did.
Like, so that mountain, like it has its own version of like the Jersey Devil, or we have Chessie here on up in Lake George, and bro, that's wild.
Yeah.
Especially when you have people contacting you after reading it and being like, hey, look, man, where did you hear this at? Like this happened to me. Like nobody's ever heard that story. Especially somebody where the wife's like, oh, my husband hit his head.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, is that is that the wildest one?
Well, that is definitely one of the wilder ones. What's funny, I was just going to mention that in the end of her email, she said, thanks a lot. Now I have to apologize to my husband for making fun of him. So.
That I mean,
But yeah.
that's an entire like, see, that's the kind of thing, like, especially once you've got people coming to you and being like, "Yeah, that happened to me and me." Now you've got all these people, like, do you like, for yourself, now that you've had multiple people in that same valley say that they saw this or mountain base, do you start digging into, like, "Hey, what else is out here? What other like, who else has said this?" And would you ever write just a story on that?
Yeah, that would be really interesting to do. One of the things I love to do like that is when somebody tells me a story involving, something weird like that, I will try and get into the folklore because I love folklore, whether it's Native American folklore or, our folklore, see if there's something out there that they talk about that's similar. And try and do all the research I can because I like to be able to also, if I can, go back to somebody who's told me their story and say, hey, this is what I found out about it. And in my books I'll do that quite a bit. I'll tell us, I'll tell a story. At the end I'll have author notes, and I'll tell them what I found out during research about this kind of entity or this that's going on, or and try and help people out that way to understand the background of it. So
That's wild. Now, is there any is there any of these type of things and again, folks, if you wanna know about what John's investigated, it's strangerbridgerland.com. And now again, going back to, ghosts, monsters, hauntings, glitches in the matrix, Sasquatch, UFOs. What's up, Josh? Um, is there any of these that you enjoy looking into more than others where you're like, hey, I prefer the UFO stories, or I prefer these little, creature type stories. Is there ones that really spark your interest more and you feel like you dig deeper into?
well, I think all of them kind of come around full circle because there's times when what's really weird, and I don't know if it's synchronicity or whatever you want to call it, but when I start, gathering stories, my next book that comes out is going to be called Stranger Idaho, because all of the stuff will be in Idaho. My last one was Stranger Utah, which was all stories in Utah. And, I don't announce until later on what my next book will be or what area, but it's so interesting. I'll sit down with my wife, who's also my editor, and I'll be like, okay, we should really do Idaho next, or because it's got, I've got so many of those stories, but I need to get more. Even without putting it out there, there will be all of a sudden people contacting me from Idaho that, I didn't even put that out there, and yet I'm getting people from Idaho to contact me. And so, I right now I'm focusing on areas to do, even though I'm collecting all over. So I don't know if it's necessarily genres like UFOs or Bigfoot, because I get really excited about all of those. But it's areas that seem to come to me at once, which is, like I said, it's synchronicity or something. So
Now, have you ever noticed, and I've noticed this personally through doing the show, talking to people, if it's ghost stories, I all like Ohio. They're special up in Ohio though, but Ohio, very East Coast. Like ghosts are very East Coast related. When I talk to people like yourself, Montana, Midwestern, like mountain areas, that's where I always seem to get more of the, "Oh, I saw the Trollkin, in my area. I saw the Bigfoot." But it also feels like the Native American stories are much more oriented that way. Have you seen something similar to that?
yeah, so no matter how many times I do this and write a book, a lot of what I get comes from the outdoors. Like even across all over the country, a lot of them come from the outdoors, and I don't know exactly why. Of course, I have things in houses, ghosts and things, and UFOs, but it's amazing how many come to me um, from the outdoor, from hikers or campers, or people who just, the big thing too is people whose backyard will back up to a forest or a, an open area, and how that can really, bring out some weird things as well.
Now, as somebody who's doing these investigations, 30 years in this, we also have had, since what is it, like the Travel Channel and the History Channel have really dug into these industries with hunting Bigfoot, ghost hunters and all these different things. And we have some great friends with Paraflix and gosh, I can't think of the one right now. Candy will be mad at me because I can't remember her network. But we have all these different networks that are out there and they do these investigations, and Spirit Realm, the folks at Spirit Realm, with all these different industries out there doing this. As somebody who's, for lack of a better term, grassroots been doing it, do you feel like it's become watered down where it's like where people are like, yeah, I saw the ghost. Like how has that kind of changed how you've seen things?
It's interesting because some of those shows I love to watch as well. People just need to remember that, just like about everything else, there is production value in any show. Um, you know, Even those guys that used to buy abandoned lockers, and then they would open
Oh
up
yeah,
and find a Van Gogh. you,
yeah. It
you've got
was
to take,
yeah,
yeah,
take it with a grain of salt.
yeah, you've got to take it with a little grain of salt. And I'm not saying any of them are necessarily faking things. But for one of my biggest examples of this is, I still get a lot of people who will send me a video saying I caught an orb on my camera. And they don't realize how IR works, that if a bug comes by or a piece of dust, it's going to glow off of IR light. And there's a few shows that they, like, for a long time, it seemed like they were just throwing dust at the camera and
Oh yeah,
yelling orb.
like look, it's an orb.
Yeah.
Oh, like a handful of talcum powder. It's an orb. Like
Yeah.
really, bro? Come on.
And if you get somebody that sends you one of those videos, you have to be really delicate, because if you're like, well, I think it's dust, they get really angry sometimes.
Oh yeah, like
You're
how
like,
dare
calm
you?
down.
You're a quack. How
Yeah.
dare you tell me it's dust?
But along those lines, I have, interviewed people. There's an area near me, it's called Logan Canyon, and it's famous for its orbs. But to give you an example, instead of being, a little tiny dust particle that glows off IR light, these orbs are about the size of a basketball, and they look
Oh
like
shit.
lightning. They look like lightning running through the inside of it. And so there's a big difference between that and a bug or dust necessarily. And when I think of orbs, that's what I think of. It's things the same, I'm serious. It's like the size of either a volleyball or up to a beach ball size. And these things seem to have, like, for example, I interviewed a gentleman who was, when he was in college at Utah State University in Cache Valley. He loved to fish. He was on the Logan River in the rain and saw one of these huge orbs going through the trees. And when he saw it, it stopped and then came towards him, like it recognized that he had recognized it.
Like
And
oh shit, somebody saw me.
yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, definitely you have to take some things that you see on TV with a grain of salt. And the other thing too that drives me crazy is now with AI, you can make almost any video you want to with AI. So you guys got to be really, careful and look. And it takes a lot of sometimes vetting when it comes to videos or pictures or something like that, because there are definitely, real things out there that people have gotten pictures or videos of. But
Well, look, folks, we're getting pretty close here to closing the bar. For those of you that are watching us live, if you've got questions for John, maybe you've got a story that you think would be worth his book, or you just got a story you want to tell everybody, drop it here in for us. We'll talk about it. If you want to reach out to John, you can find him at strangerbridgerland.com. Going back to the orbs for a second, it's funny you mentioned this. I haven't thought about this in years. That's actually, I remember being a kid and reading a book, and it was one of those like Ripley's Believe It or Not books when they used to come out, where they've been able to explain something similar to that. Have you ever heard about the balls of lightning on planes?
Yeah, I
A-
have.
and it has something to do with static electricity in the air and the plane. Now that's something the other side to that is what's interesting to me as you're saying that I can remember reading that in the Ripley books, and now everything's online, everything's in the news. Um, I've never heard a story about that since reading those books as a kid. That's interesting.
Yeah, it really is too. Yeah, and where it was during a rainstorm and stuff,
Yeah.
I thought maybe ball lightning, but he just the way he saw it and felt like it recognized him and then came towards him. There was something with it, but you just never know. I mean, it's amazing some of the things that are going on, like right now with all of the drones that are going on
Uh,
the East Coast, and just like
oh, the drone thing. Real,
yeah.
real quick here. Rose says she gifted one of your books for Christmas to a friend. She hasn't heard back yet, but will share when she does.
Oh, thanks,
Uh,
Rose.
Josh has a great question here, and we've all heard this. My dog barks in the corner. My dog can see ghosts. But we've heard the story. Like, I know you've heard the stories where they interview the kid and they're like, "Oh, he's actually a World War II general. He could never know these things." And like he's
Right.
describing friends, and they've been dead for 70 years and all these other things. But do you believe that like children can actually see spirits? Like they're a little more attuned because they haven't been polluted by, saying that that's not real?
Yeah, I really do. I have several stories there that I've interviewed people when they were kids and they could remember different interactions that they had. One that really stands out to me that really reiterates this, that I think kids can see more. I interviewed this guy. He actually lives in Australia, and he would go visit his grandma. And and this is the thing, is he has an eidetic memory, so he remembers everything. Like he's got, he can recall everything.
Oh, and
And
Tuesday,
so,
July 7th of 1987, I had on a blue shirt with green
right.
shoes, that kind
Yeah,
of thing.
that kind of thing, exactly. And as a kid, he would go to his grandma's with his mom, and his mom and grandma would have coffee in the front, and he would go in the back and play with this little boy that had on, old style clothes and everything. And he remembers talking to the boy and playing with the boy, and the boy telling him that he came across on a ship, and he got sick, and they made him stay in the hospital after the ship, and then he hasn't been able to find his parents since. And
Oh,
over the years,
oh,
the little boy got harder and harder for him to see, until by the time he was 8, he couldn't see him anymore. But later on, he found out that where his grandma lives, just down the road, was one of those quarantine stations from the 1800s, where anybody that came off the ship who was sick had to stay in there until they were better. And so, and he remembers all this, and in his mind, when he was little, he could just see the boy, and the boy had come up from down the road where, he had died, and he knew that he could see him, and they played, like I said, for many years when he visited his grandma, and he would tell grandma and mom about it, and they just thought he had an imaginary friend. But because he has such, the eidetic memory, he remembers it like it
oh.
was yesterday. So
Yeah, that's not cool. And Josh says the reason he's asking this is his 2-year-old uh, says that he sees a black monster in our home sometimes. That's why he's asking. Josh, that's called mold. You need to call your landlord, tell him to clean that up. That's what. No, I'm kidding. I don't let
I
me
have a
don't let Ronnie
suggestion for
don't let
Josh.
Ronnie know that I said that, because I ain't. But so, what's the suggestion?
So not too long ago, a couple years ago, I was contacted by a family, and they had a little girl that was about between 2 and 3, and she would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning every morning, screaming about the man in her room. And so, I came and I talked to the family. We talked to the little girl, did some research. Come to find out that she was adopted. The little girl was adopted, and through I had a paranormal group come through that I trusted, that would kind of do EVPs and try. And through all this, we found out that it was actually her grandpa, who had passed away from the other family, who was just coming to check on her, but didn't know, he was scaring her necessarily. And all
Oh,
it
wow.
took was the family at night for the first couple of days when they put her to bed, they would just say out loud, "Hey, Bob, we know you like to check in on her, but it scares her because she can see you. Please don't." And it went away. So sometimes just speaking out loud and saying, "Hey, this is my house now. Please don't scare my kid." It actually works. I've seen that work several times.
So Candy and Ashley and gosh, I can't think of the other gentleman's name right now from over at Spirit Realm. We've talked
Mhm.
about this where I'm a firm believer because I had somebody say this to me one time. Any house I've ever owned, moved into, whether it was on base, anything like that, I walk through the house and have a conversation. This is my home now. I live here. We appreciate what everything you've done, but it's time for you to go. You're released from this house. You can go now. And anytime I've done that, I haven't had any issues. Times that I haven't, things go missing, things get bumped, things make noises. And yeah, Josh, we were just talking about that. He's heard that some children also can remember lives before. That's a whole thing where if you look that up, there's a very well documented case where a kid was like started talking about being in the Second World War and his unit and all these things. And there's no way this kid could have known it. And they started tracing who he said he was and were able to find surviving members of the unit and all these other things and people that had been around it. And it was really super wild. We're getting closer and closer here to closing everything up. Is there any area, I don't care if it's the US, overseas, anything for yourself where you're like, man, is there a place where you're like, I really want to go. I heard this story. I'd like to talk to this person, or I'd like to investigate this story to see, how real can it very much can it be?
I've got a bucket list of places I want to go visit just because of all the stories and everything like that. I tour through England and all of the castles there, places in New Zealand. Yeah, I could go for an hour telling you all the places I would like to go see and like to, just to walk around and get the feel of and talk to people. So yeah, there's a lot.
See, I'll tell you, is there one that sticks out? The number one.
Yeah, I want to go to the Tower of London really
Oh,
bad. I want
really?
to go to the Tower of London. Yep.
There's a lot. There's definitely a lot there because there was like tortures and everything in that place, wasn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of famous ghosts there. Henry VIII's wives and just a ton of stuff like that.
I got to tell you, John. I think what I love about your approach is again we've had a lot of paranormal investigators on. We've had people that's their thing and their EVP and um I Candy and then would yell at me because I always forget the name of it where they like they're blindfolded and they put the headphones on and they can they can't hear anything because it's got the white noise and one person's asking questions and they're like, "What's your name?" Dave.
Yeah. Yeah.
7, and, like, they have no idea what the questions are, and that one always blows my mind. But
Yeah.
what I love about your approach is you're not like, "Oh, there's a house in my neighborhood that's supposedly haunted. I'm gonna go myself and spend the night in the basement." You're just looking for people's stories and telling their story and kind of investigating, well, wow, you actually do live on, like Poltergeist. Hey, they did build your home on
Yeah.
Indian burial grounds and no one knew about it. Huh. That was a thing at the time. I mean, that's such a unique approach. And I have to give you kudos for that because I don't know how many people out there are still doing what you do.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I just love to learn everything I can, and I actually love history too, so it's kind of right up my alley. And like you say, when I hear something, I want to know if there's something like a history connected, or something happened on the land, or is there folklore that corroborates what you're saying. So I really like to do that kind of stuff. So thank you.
That's wild. And hey, Oliver. when I can say that Oliver has known me since my birth, and then known my family since before then. This was my Aunt Sharon's best friend growing up. He said, after my father passed away, he would seem to be in attendance at special events like graduations for my siblings. Uh, Oliver, here's one that'll blow your mind. He this will make sense to him when I say my poppy.
Mm.
Poppy many times has showed up to my mother and me when I was still in Baltimore. Never since I've traveled outside of Maryland, but anytime I was around my mother. And what does he say here? But never for me. So many people seem to have experiences in their lives. Well, you let me know if Aunt Sharon shows up for you. How about that one? That would be much more impressive to me. So any events coming up, John? Like if somebody was out in the Utah area, anything coming up where like, hey, I'm speaking at this, or you're going to be on any other shows?
Right now, I do have a couple speaking events. I'm going to be speaking at UVU down in the Provo Valley in
What is that?
March.
What is
Uh,
UVU?
University of Utah Valley University. It's a newer one, so I have to think for a minute. Utah Valley University. I'm going to be speaking at a symposium down there for folklore, and then also some of the paranormal stuff. And the best way too is on Stranger Bridgerland. I usually try and keep up on my speaking page and let people know where I'll be. So that'll be. I have some coming up that I just have to. I haven't got solidified yet, so I don't want to say, but
I get that. Hold on, Oliver. Are you trying to say Aunt Sharon showed up to you? Look, if Aunt Sharon's like, and I'll just tell you, my Aunt Sharon was like the original, like loved music, was always into music, was always like, I can still remember being a little guy and like 3, 4 years old. And when the song Another One Bites the Dust from Queen came out, like she would have me dancing this shit like that. Like my Aunt Sharon was the best. Absolutely the best. But so look, folks, again, I say it all the time. If you're finding John through me or me through John, take the time, like, share, follow. I know how cliche it sounds. I know it's like, share, follow. It sounds like your kids when they're watching all those different videos of people playing video games, but that's truly how the internet works. It's how all these things work. You taking the time to do those things gets that message out, gets other people to know about what we've got going on, gets people to know that, hey, this is what we have happening. It also helps John out. He sells way more books that way and becomes super famous and all kinds of stuff. And as you know, we always make hard left turns around here and things never are absolutely the same. So joining us next week, look, but we are staying with the writer theme. We're staying with writers. We have, and you got to have a good Italian on every so often, Karen Lombardo, gotta love Karen. She's a friend of mine. She's a copywriter, but she spends most of her days uh, in her business world, but yet she's also a children's book writer. And she's written these books using her dog as kind of the main character of the story. But really, what she does, and we're going to get into all her different writing stuff. One of the coolest things she does is she writes people's wedding vows for them. And it's not Dear Abby. She'll tell us what it is. It's not coming up to me, and I'm double checking my notes to make sure what it is. But she actually does some stuff where, because the children's books are Miss Tilly, but she does some stuff where she answers like love related kind of questions for people. But she does it, it's out of Europe. So she does it for like this whole Romeo Juliet type thing out of Europe. And we're going to talk about those things and how that all works. So make sure you're giving John a good follow there, checking out strangerbridgerland.com. Now, John, I know you've binged everything that I have to offer, all 250, 260 episodes. You're fully immersed in everything here at the bar. But just in case you've forgotten, don't log off on me afterwards. I know you got something real quick you got to do. We got to talk for 1 minute. As always, the guest always gets the final word. So what's the final word for tonight, John?
Keep it strange.
Alrighty, folks, be sure to push your stool in.
This has been a Second Front podcast presentation found on Apple, Spotify, and wherever podcasts can be found.